Hi, everyone. I'm Kira Sorrells, and this is NICUnity. NICUnity is NICU Parent Network's all-encompassing educational initiative to foster a culture of belonging for all members of our community. I'm delighted to be joined by my friend and co-host, Gigi Kanyangwa Fernandez, who is the founder of GKF Consulting and Families Blossoming. She's also our current NPN board president. This initiative is made possible by the generous support of Chiesi USA. Chiesi is a privately owned, research-focused pharmaceutical company committed to infant care for over 3 decades. As a sustainable company accredited with both a B Corp and Benefit Corporation status, Chiesi strives to make an impact through forward-looking and impactful initiatives that benefit patients, patient families, providers, and healthcare organizations. Chiesi recognizes and appreciates the vital role that patient families play in the care of babies in the NICU and is very proud to support our community. You can visit www.NICUconnections.com to learn more about what they do. Our monthly schedule of NICUnity offerings include discussions, leadership lounges, and special healthcare topic webinars that bring together our NICU parent leaders, adult former NICU patients, healthcare partners, and maternal infant health stakeholders for candid discussions about the diverse experiences in the NICU and beyond. What we want to do with this initiative is to shine a light on those who are often marginalized, silenced, and underestimated. And we are thrilled that we can provide this platform for these raw, authentic conversations. So I want to thank you for joining us as we embark on this journey of learning, growth, and unity. Together, we will build a stronger, more inclusive NICU community, one conversation at a time. In today's episode, we're talking all about grief and loss in the NICU, with a particular focus on the loss of multiples and exploring those different reactions and experiences to death in the NICU. I'm delighted to welcome 2 very special guests for today's episode, Dr. Nicholas Embleton and Corey Lemley. Nick is a professor of neonatal medicine and leads a broad portfolio of research focused in 2 areas, neonatal nutrition and baby loss. Qualitative studies have explored the feelings and experiences of parents who suffered baby loss and the staff who care for them. He's enjoyed a 30-year career in neonatal medicine and enjoys the challenges of supporting families through one of the most difficult journeys in their life. Nick collaborates widely with parent-led advocacy groups around the world and is passionate about improving outcomes through better education. Corey Lemley is the mother of a surviving twin who was born at 22 weeks one day. His brother lived for just 20 hours. She was raised Jewish, and during the time before birth, during the NICU stay, and after death, Corey embraced Judaism more than she had previously throughout her life. She's told me that parenting a surviving twin is difficult because there is the constant what if revolving around what life would have been with 2 same-age living children. Corey is a peer mentor for one of NPN's founding members, a community-based support organization, Graham's Foundation, and loves this role as she's able to help parents learn how to embrace the and life, celebrating and grieving simultaneously each day. I love that, Corey. So before we get started, I do want to say to our listeners that the topic of grief and loss can be very difficult and may be triggering. So we want you to know that we're here to support you. If you feel the need to speak with someone to help you work through some of the emotions that may come up, please reach out to us. You can send a message to admin@NICUparentnetwork.org, and we'll be sure to connect you with one of our incredible organizations. We just want you to, listen to your body. The sensations and emotions you experience are normal when you've experienced the loss of a child. And we also want to remind everyone that, our grief journeys and experiences are unique. There are no 2 that are the same. And we really want to honor and hold space for you where you are in your own path. Gigi and I have both experienced loss, and today is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. So I'm delighted that we're able to really bring this to light today.
Mhm.
And I know that our panel is going to be able to offer some insights that maybe we haven't considered before.
Mhm.
So, Gigi, Corey, Nick, thank you all so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Corey, let's begin with you. First and foremost, thank you for being willing to be in this vulnerable space and to talk about your loss. So, I'd love to just start right there, if you don't mind, and just give us share with us your story and how you came to be a part of this bereaved parents community.
Yeah, so in May 2020, I was about 20 weeks pregnant with my twins. Of course, it was such an awful time being right in the middle of COVID, so there wasn't a
Mhm.
lot of um, connection, anyways. But about 20 weeks and 6 days, my water broke with one of my twins. They were in two separate sacs, had two separate placentas, but were still identical. So we went right to the hospital. We thought this was it. We're done. Um, and it was determined that Ezra was still fine. That eventually, I was there for about a week. That his water had replenished, um, and an amnio showed there was nothing wrong, but I was still just having weird just symptoms,
Mhm.
and that at 22 and 1 they came, and nothing else broke, and I went into the hospital again, and that was it. And so we're really lucky that we were in a hospital that was willing to intervene at 22 weeks, because a lot of them at that time still weren't.
Mhm.
Um, so we were really, really lucky for that. Um, they came. Ezra was whisked away right away. Um, and then about 20 minutes later, Rowan came out, and his water was broken by my doctor, because he was completely fine the entire time. It was just Ezra that was having complications. He came out breech. He cried. He had 30 seconds of delayed cord clamping, and then they took him to work on him. Um, and then they were as stable as could be. They had that golden hour. We had a great NICU, and um, when we went up to see them that night, they was still stable. Ezra had had some complications. He'd crashed once. So we had to have that conversation of, well, how far do we go? What do we do
Mhm.
to as far as life-saving measures at this point? And so we just kind of decided that, if it happens again, then we'll stop, because he had crashed. He had a collapsed lung. Um, so we just knew that if anything else happened, we didn't want to push it. We didn't want to put him through that.
Mhm.
Um, so the next morning, they made it through the night. The next morning, he had crashed again. So we had to have that conversation with the doctor, with the
Mhm.
neonatologist at that point. She said that he was extremely septic. His white blood cell count, I think, was 35. It was just too much for his little body. So we let him go. We held him. We were really lucky. They let my mom come up to see him,
Mhm.
um, and we got to spend as much time with him as we wanted.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, Corey. I really appreciate you allowing us into that space with you during that time. And I was just wondering, I was just reflecting back on what you were saying, and it sounded like you were in an incredibly supportive space because you said about, the NICU was very supportive. Um, and I just wonder, when you're in that space, were you, was that support, what did that support look like? Were people talking to you, telling you what was going on, sort of minute by minute, or it was as things happened, you had those discussions, or was it a combination of all of the above?
It was kind of a combination. We were any question we had was answered. We were
Mm.
definitely given our space, but we were also told very gently kind of what all was happening.
Mhm.
They actually, when after we had them and I was still in postpartum, and they were brought up to the NICU, and Ezra was having some complications kind of earlier on too. So they came and got us to go see them a little earlier than we had wanted. And that's when more information was kind of given to us. We definitely weren't bombarded with information unless we asked for it. I was actually really, going back to when I first went into the hospital, when my water broke, I felt like I was actually given too little information at first. Everybody just kind of danced around what the possibilities could be. I wanted to know what's going to happen, and I knew that nobody could give me an exact answer, but I wanted to know from a medical standpoint, what do they think is going to be the outcome? And I had a couple doctors just kind of say, and nurses, oh, well, we'll see. We got to take it day by day, hour by hour. But that wasn't enough for me. I wanted to know, and for my own logic, but also just so that I could mentally prepare myself. What do I need to get ready for? And I finally had one doctor who was the high risk doctor in my practice. He came in, and I had never met him before. I love him. And I said to him, what do you think is going to happen? And he said to me, my husband had gone home to get some stuff. And so it was just the two of us. And he said, do you really want to know what I think? And I said, yeah. And he said, I don't think you're going to go home with any babies. And I said, okay. But that was what I needed to kind of get me out of that panic and into that, okay, this is what we need to get ready for. And what's it going to look like at each step? So I think just having that combination, both there and in the NICU, being straightforward, but not also, it's hard because they can't give you any real answers. Things can change at a second. And one of our neonatologists told us, after Ezra had died, but still only a couple days into Rowan's stay, we said, well, when would you consider us to be in like a safe zone of being able to go home? And he said, when you go home, because anything can change at any point. So
I noticed a lot of, you're right, there's a delicate balance there, and I was noticing, Nick, that you were I think we both were noticing that you were doing a lot of nodding. I'm just wondering, like, what's coming up for you when you're listening to Corey's story and her experience.
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for having me on, and let me start by, I guess, paying respects to all of you for the work that you do in the face of having lost babies on neonatal units. I'm a physician. I've never had that experience myself. I've never had a sick baby on a neonatal unit, and I will never pretend to understand what it might feel like to be going through what all of you have been through. And then listening to Corey and how she had to face that really, really difficult time. Again, I can't begin to imagine what it feels like to be a parent, and I wouldn't insult anybody by suggesting that just because I've read about this and studied it that I know what it feels like to be a parent. I don't. So I think I just want to start there by saying that as physicians, we're never going to understand it unless we've also been unfortunate enough to be in that situation. But the point that I sort of followed on from Corey was about this: how do we share uncertainty? I mean, how are we able to guide parents like Corey in terms of what the likely outcomes might be, whilst at the same time acknowledging that in any individual baby, we never know what's going to happen. And all of us can provide examples of babies where we really thought the babies were not going to survive, yet somehow miraculously they did. And all of us sadly will have stories of babies where we thought that the babies were going to do well, yet something happened. So that trying to share that uncertainty is one of our greatest challenges, and I think the overriding principle for me as a physician is one of honesty. To say, not ever to lie and say that I know what's going to happen, or try and be too precise, to try and share the range of possibilities. And what I hear from parents all the time is that you don't expect us to be miracle workers, to be religious leaders, to be psychologists, to predict the future. You don't expect that of us. But what you do expect is that, first of all, we're honest with you. And secondly, we practice neonatal medicine in a way that shows you that we genuinely care. Well, I don't want to be cheesy and say that, you know, I love every baby that I've looked after. Of course I don't. I have a professional job to do. But I think many of us do recognize the enormous privilege that we have doing this job, to kind of look after your babies with you. So as I say, yeah, I think for me it's about being honest.
Yeah. And when Corey, when you shared, when you asked the doctor what's going to happen, I mean, it really just, it put me right back in a similar conversation that I had with one of my daughters who we did take home from the NICU, but she died later. And it was because my mother was trying to get me to send out birth announcements. I had 25 weekers, and I thought, I am not sending out birth announcements. First of all, my babies don't look like babies. It's going to scare people. And second of all, I don't know if I'm going to bring them home. And that was one of those days when I just asked, I asked one of the doctors, I said, should I be planning a funeral? And it was kind of just that honest conversation where, you know, he couldn't tell me for sure, but he was willing to sit there and talk with me. And I'm sure that was very uncomfortable for him, but I was so grateful, like you said, just to have something to hold on to and know, what do I need to be preparing myself for?
Yeah. And I guess I was thinking when you were talking about the whole idea about the uncertainty, and I think that's that space of it could go any way at any second, at any time. I mean, and that's what I mean. We were in NICU for 6 months, 1 week shy of 6 months, and literally, like, I think what you said, Corey, about you don't know until you go home, and even when you go home, you don't know. So there's this incredible length of time, you know, and we know that, you know, even when you go home, you know, we have this artificial 2-year. I don't know who they need to throw that out in the rubbish, but the 2-year thing doesn't mean anything because so much, is happening even long after that. But I think that the uncertainty, both acutely, but also indefinitely, really, that's what we're talking about. And I guess being okay, all of us, parents and clinicians, being okay to kind of sit in that uncertainty, because in some ways, I mean, there's a scariness in that. There's also a strength because, like you said, Corey, I mean, I was like, I just need to know. And if it doesn't work, if it doesn't happen the way that you've anticipated, that's fine. But I would rather have more information than not. But then everyone is different. But it's about that relationship that you're having with your providers and understanding what you need at that time.
Yeah. Corey, I'd like to know too, because like you said, you had a supportive NICU. What did they do for you in that time when you did decide that it was time to let him go? Did they have a special room for you? You said your mother was able to come up. Can you just share kind of what was provided for you in those moments?
We were not in a separate room. We were in his room. He had his own room. Most of the NICU rooms in that hospital were just single rooms. So we were by ourselves. So I think the curtains were closed. It's all kind of funny or fuzzy how fast it all happened. And from what, you know, like I said, it was during COVID. So what we saw might not have been an accurate picture of what they do typically, but it was still very calm. We were, like I said, we were allowed to have my mother come up. They had a bench. It was like a pull-out couch. So we sat there, and that's where we kind of held him at first. And the respiratory therapist came in and took out his intubation tube. And at that point, we moved kind of closer to where his incubator was and just held him and rocked him. And I felt like little things kind of kept popping up throughout that time. We had a couple of nurses who were there, just his nurses, during that day. I think the chaplain came up They had just the hospital chaplain. I think he came up at one point. They did footprints, I think, while we were there? I don't remember if it was while we were there or not. But before he was removed from the room, there were little things that they would ask us if we wanted. Did we want footprints of this? Did we want handprints on this? And there was a keepsake box that was at one point brought into the room when I wasn't there. One of the best things that we have photos from Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. They had a photographer who was able to come in still and do photos of we could have been in the photos. I chose not to at that point, which is one of my biggest regrets, but my feelings were at the time I didn't want to be sad in pictures with him. So looking back, I think I would have made a different choice, but so just little throughout that it wasn't bombarding. It wasn't like, oh, you have to do this and you have to do that. It was very much like you take your time and process it. And if you have any questions.
Yeah. And then with the twins, so when you came back, and this is something I want to get into with Nick, specifically about you having to go back to that NICU where you just lost a baby, but you've still got a baby that's still fighting for his life. How were you supported by the staff in that? Were there any, did they do anything to continue to acknowledge that he was a twin, or did you want that? Any thoughts on that?
I think it kind of depended on the nurse. We had some nurses that knew right away that he was a twin, and others who I wasn't sure if they knew, and I would kind of drop it just a little, just kind of, oh yeah, his brother, or, what we had was something, but it was also Ezra wasn't there for very long. At one point, I did have a nurse who told me about purple butterflies. So I did make one of those. But I think one of the biggest things too was also reminding me, I had a lot of nurses who would remind me that, Rowan's still a different baby. And what happened to Ezra isn't necessarily what's going to happen to Rowan. And I think that was a big help. We had, they did make a little corner in the hospital room that said Ezra's corner, Ezra the helper, because his name we found out later means helper. We didn't plan it that way. We just liked the name, and we found out after that that's what it meant. So we kind of had that little corner there for him to kind of be a part of Rowan's journey throughout.
I like that.
Nick, can you share with us about your kind of professional journey and the development of the Butterfly Project, the research you've done around loss and multiple births?
Yeah, this goes back a long time now, maybe 15 years or so, when I started working with some social scientists, trying to understand what it felt like to be a parent involved in a decision to limit further active intensive care. So the decision making when you do remove the ventilator tube, or you agree that you won't put the baby through a further operation, because we wanted to understand how do parents, I guess, take that kind of burden with them forward in their lives. I mean, how do you make sense of what you've been through and what you've been asked to do? And we started speaking to staff as well. And it was when we were doing that I realized that some of the parents we were speaking with had twin babies, where one baby had died and one baby had survived. And I realized that this was in front of us every week on the NICU, and nobody ever really knew what to do. And certainly in the first sort of 10, 15 years of my career, I think our approach, particularly as physicians, was just to try and forget that there was another baby who died, just focus on the baby who was alive. And that, manifests itself in lots of different ways, that the writing of a baby as being twin 1 or twin 2, that got kind of rubbed out on the whiteboards. People just wanted not to even kind of deal with it. And then in subsequent years, I've learned how hurtful and difficult that has been for parents to feel that maybe we didn't care about this baby who died. And that's really what led on to then what is now the Butterfly Projects. We set out again and we spoke to about 20 families who had had a multiple pregnancy where one baby had died, either as a miscarriage or stillbirth or a neonatal death, and where they had at least one surviving baby. So the majority were twins, but we had some triplet mums where they could have had one triplet who might have died in utero, and you just have two live-born babies. And that presented lots of issues because everybody assumed that this mum just had twins. So we did a lot of work really just listening to parents is to explain what it felt like to be involved in this, and we listened to staff, and that's what led on to creating guidelines and workshops. And it was in one of the workshops with a mum, a bereaved mum of twins where one baby had died. It was a mum who said to me, a little blue butterfly, just put a butterfly on the cot and then everybody will remember that he's a twin. And I thought, oh, like literally, oh, that's such a simple idea. And we made it purple so that it wasn't either, neither blue nor pink. And we started doing it straight away. And it changed the way staff in the unit supported parents, and not really just solely in twin loss, but just dealing with grief and trauma more generally. Really just encouraging physicians and nurses that you can just be a normal human being in that very scary technical world. There's this idea that you need to be professional and a little bit withdrawn and maybe a bit aloof, and actually really how you as parents don't expect us to be like that, and in fact you don't really want us to be like that. You want us to be human beings. You want us to understand how difficult and how sad these times are, and that's carried on with me for the last sort of 15 years, my professional career, trying to understand how we behave as healthcare professionals, and how we deal with this. And so just thinking again about Corrie and the respiratory therapist who comes in and removes that breathing tube. Well, what does it feel like to be that RT, to actually do something that results in the baby dying? And and I've thought for years that maybe I was a bit strange, but I could be in a room and I could remove a breathing tube and a baby could die, and then I walk out of that room 10-15 minutes later, and I walk down the corridor and I bump into one of my colleagues and he says, come on, let's go and have a coffee. Like, he doesn't know what I've been doing, and I have to switch from being in that very emotional environment to just being kind of regular guy going having coffee. And I thought maybe I was a bit of a weirdo, that I could somehow flip. And I think this does create a lot of challenges for healthcare staff. I mean, how do we deal with the responsibility of the decision making that we have to do? And are we always comfortable with the decisions we make, be they decisions to withdraw or decisions to continue? I know that for some staff that can be quite a burden, and undoubtedly results in burnout in quite a few staff.
I just want to go back to what you said about just being human. I saw Corrie gave a big nod, and it really is. I mean, that is the bedrock of trauma-informed care and communication. It's relating to another human in your shared humanity. And I mean, I certainly, in my experience, looked to the clinicians around me for that support and connection because I had nobody else around. And Corrie, how would you mind just kind of sharing what's coming up for you when we're talking about that?
Yeah, I have a couple nurses in mind who I remember very clearly, and I'm still in touch with them now. One of the things I always remember too is one of them said to me, my job is not just to take care of the baby. My job is to also take care of you and make sure that you know what you can do and that you're doing everything you can and that you're comfortable, and just kind of walking you through it and getting you ready to go home with the baby too. And that was one of the biggest takeaways too, I think I had from that experience was that, and I remind other parents about that too, that, you know, the nurses and the doctors, they're there for you also, to let you know what you need, and to remind you to take care of you too, that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that's part of their job, is to, you know, they want to send that baby home, but they want to make sure too that they're going to go home to a parent who is also mentally prepared for them to come home. So
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking, I thank you both for sharing those insights. And I was just thinking about, Nick, when you were talking about, you know, the switching off, and I'm a clinician by background, I don't practice anymore, but it's interesting. I remember, you know, in training, it was very much around, you used the word professionalism, that some sort of way along the line, professionalism meant that you were no longer human. And so, but in speaking with other, you know, clinicians, I think it's, you know, you're actually not trained to do that. And actually you're kind of, it's like you're counter trained, if that's such a word, you know, where it's don't get close to the families, don't get close to, you know, because you're losing your objectivity, you know, you're not, you know, it's all those things. So it's, I guess I'm just wondering what your insights would be from that perspective, and what would be, I guess, a key point when you're looking at, you know, supporting healthcare professionals, maybe training and education around that line between, well, I don't even know if it's a line, but just that world of human professionalism, humanism, whatever. I'm making up stuff because that's my forte. But around that, in order that we can better support and better show up for families, but also for ourselves and each other.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly possible to be the complete professional and also to express emotion in healthcare. It would be a very sad place to work, a neonatal unit, if we weren't allowed to share our emotions. It seems easier for nurses to share their emotions, easier for female nurses to share their emotions, and probably most challenging for grey-haired white men like me to share their emotions. I think we need to be aware of how we're showing the emotions. I think if I was to be in the room when a baby dies and I was to start sobbing, I think parents would probably freak out and probably be a bit concerned. So I think we need to be careful that we don't place an emotional burden on parents. You know, if we're all stood around weeping, that might be quite challenging for parents. But at the same time, I don't think there's anything unprofessional about sharing emotions. You all have to do it and find a way to cope with the job. And most neonatologists, we self-select. I mean, if we really are in pieces when a baby dies, it's not going to be much of a fun job to do. So I think we all learn how to do it. But yeah, I think the relationship we have with parents is a very interesting one. The parents, on the one hand, sort of, we are kind of caring for them in a professional sense. But you know, in many ways we're not. I mean, I'm not an obstetrician, I'm not a family doctor. And so what is this relationship I might have with a mum like Corrie that might go on for weeks and months, where inevitably we end up talking about other things other than just the baby? We talk about the soccer, we talk about what's happening around town. I was kind of taken aback many years ago when a mother of a baby who had died contacted me and wanted to be my friend on Facebook. And I thought long and hard, am I allowed to be a friend with her? You know, what is my relationship with her? And so I think it is very interesting, you know, what is the relationship we have with parents? I mean, you know, of course we have to act in a friendly manner, but are we allowed to be friends? I mean, are we allowed to chat about stuff that isn't related to work? And then how do I make sense of what I do at work in my private life? I mean, am I allowed to be sad about, you know, what happens on the neonatal? You know, am I sad? Am I allowed to be sad about babies who die? Equally, is it okay if I don't feel desperately sad about every baby that I've looked after who've died? Because if I felt desperately sad about every baby, I wouldn't be able to get up in the morning and come to work. So I think it's a very interesting area, but I think I would encourage all healthcare professionals not to ignore or deny the emotions they feel. You know, it would be quite a scary thing if you could look after a baby and not feel moved by the suffering of that baby and then the suffering of the family when a baby dies. So I want people to embrace it, but at the same time recognize there are limits to how we express our emotion if we are still to act as professionals.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's you know, it is again just reflecting on my own experiences as well, and there are those, you know, there's a handful of nurses and a neonatologist that really you know, really connected with for one reason or another, and knowing that they cared about my babies was very important to me. You know, I know not every nurse that ever laid hands on her was going to, you know, be significantly touched. But we do have this, we've got a great comment right now from Kristen that I just want to share with you all. It says, we may all agree that grief is not linear. Neither is the spectrum of emotions that we experience, no matter what the outcome for a NICU patient and family is to be. I think NICU professionals and parents should be allowed to bond and network long after the NICU. However, the range or depth of emotions we share and relationships we have will differ on a case-by-case basis. And I mean, I have to agree. I mean, that's just true in life with anybody, right? And I mean, I know, Corey, you're still, you know, quite close with a couple of nurses, and I'm sure that's been, you know, it means something when they remember the birthday or they remember the day that they passed.
And I think that that's a beauty. I love that what you just said, Kristen, and it kind of sort of is one of the anchors of what we're talking about today. And going back to what you said, Nick, about the uncertainty, that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not know. It's okay for us to be in this space in a completely different way. And I think I love that thing about, you know, what you just said about it's not linear and it's not sort of a one size fits all. And I think that's a part of like in our experience, that was a part of the healing, that I didn't have to grieve in a certain way. And actually, you know, the grieving, you said about the sobbing, you know, in some ways I was fearful of doing that because it was, oh, this person isn't coping. You know, this, you know, she can't go home with the baby because she don't know what to do. I mean, she's like a nervous wreck. And so I think sometimes we have to always be careful, even for ourselves. I mean, I don't know if you agree with this, Corey, or not. Akira, but sometimes it's, you know, there's a fear oftentimes of being overly vulnerable. And so you're checking yourself oftentimes, and you're trying to figure out who can you show your vulnerability with. And I think that's life, but that kind of triggered when you talked about, Kristen, about that, you know, the non-linear aspect of it, that is so different for every individual in that space, you know, whether it be parent, you know, clinician or everyone else. So that's kind of came up for me. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think I struggled with that more actually when Rowan came home. And, you know, and that was, I was home for a while before I went back to work, but my biggest fear was keeping everything together at work. I think I spent the majority of the time in the NICU, just moving along, doing what I needed to do. You know, I had my moments where I broke down in the NICU room, but it was more keeping it together once I went back to work and not letting my anxieties about what am I going to bring home to Rowan once I'm surrounded by 12 different kids. And, you know, I was so worried. I already lost one baby. Didn't feel like I could do that again. And how I was so concerned about protecting myself to protect Rowan when he was home, because we didn't have that security of the NICU anymore, and people weren't checking his oxygen levels and all that. So it was much harder for me to regain composure afterwards. I think I finally that was it. Once we were home.
Yeah. You see the
Corey,
comment? The comment.
Megan. So Megan says, I love the honesty, Nick. I think for a lot of people, the doctors and nurses that save their babies' lives, or when they are there for the death of their babies, they become almost godlike in their eyes. And this leads to the connection of them wanting to them on social media because you're a reminder for them of their
Yeah.
baby, that their
Of their
baby
experience.
existed.
We're often, you know, one of a few number of people who ever kind of met your babies. Like, sadly, many of your family and friends
That's
never
true.
met
Yeah.
your babies who died.
Mm.
Yet, you know, we were there with them, and we touched them, and we knew them in some way. And I think to kind of deny that special connection would be a real shame. I mean, I don't think there's any difficulty in you know, people like us being friends with parents after discharge, but it does make me think very carefully about my social media profile, because I realize that, you know, if I am to be you know, treated with, you know, respect, whatever, my social media profile kind of merges with my professional profile.
Yeah.
And therefore it does make me more thoughtful, I guess, about what appears on social media, because I realize, you know, you may you know, accord us, you know, sort of, people say kind of hero status, whatever. You know, I wouldn't want to ruin it by some, you know, unpleasant photos of me on a night out with the nurses. So I think, like, you know, we want to be human,
Right.
but at the same time, you know, that is, you know, along with the privilege of being part of people's lives, is something that is the most important thing that's ever happened to you. Part of the privilege, you know, comes along with a cost, which is you have to just think carefully about your social media profile. But yeah, I think it would be very sad if we weren't allowed to be human beings and friends. And I bump into people in the city the whole time whose babies I looked after, and literally, honestly, 2 hours ago, I was in a shop in town, and I turned the corner, and the shop assistant just jumped down in front of me and said, "Oh my God, Dr. Embleton." And she started telling me about her baby that I'd looked after 8 years ago. And to be honest, I didn't remember who she was. But I mean, she was in tears because, you know, she was taken back to this very traumatic, difficult period, and I was this figure. So yeah, I think we do need to recognize as physicians that very special role we play. And I could talk a lot about hero complexes and doctors if you want to talk about it.
We'll do that on another episode.
Yeah,
Yes.
That would be a good one for sure. Corey, I
Yeah.
want to touch on your faith, because you did mention that in your bio, and it's something we want to talk about today, because you said that you grew up Jewish, but really leaned into that when you had this experience. Can you share with us how that came to be, how it helped you?
So it really started when I was in the hospital after my water broke. I was just kind of at a loss. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I was just laying there. I didn't, I didn't know, should I be talking to somebody? Should I be praying to God? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? And I just had one prayer that just kind of kept sticking through in my mind, called the Mishaberach, and it's a prayer for healing. But in the past, I'd always known it as something we say when somebody is sick. And at this point, I was like, well, I'm not sick. Like, I'm just waiting for my babies to be born. The babies aren't technically sick. Like, we don't know, but that was the only thing that I knew. And so I got to talk with the rabbi that I grew up with, and it was his words that were, when you say the Mishaberach, you're saying it's for healing, but it's also just to kind of guide that strength, guide that healing, and that being able to do the right thing and make the right choices. And it's, you say it for you say it for the babies, you say it for the doctors and the nurses to make sure that they're doing, that they know what to do. And so that just kind of stuck with me. And that's what we did each night. We did it each night in the hospital. We did it each night in the NICU, for both the boys. And that's just kind of what got it started, that it wasn't, that was the answer that I needed. I needed to know, what can I do that wasn't feeling like anybody was on their deathbed. And because at that point they weren't. Like, we didn't know what was going to happen, and we wanted to just believe that they were going to come out and thrive. And
Right.
I wanted to not feel like I wasn't doing anything, but I also didn't want to jinx anything, because part of me was just, I can't do anything and not worry that it's the wrong thing. So this was a way to kind of guide me through that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you, oh, sorry, Kira, you're going to.
No, please
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I was just going to say, thank you for sort of for sharing that, the origin of that. And I was just curious about, is that also what sort of helped you propel into this? I love how you described it earlier about the living end. Oh, I think we lost Corey.
I think we just lost her for a
Oh,
second.
we lost her. She didn't want to hear my query. No, she'll come back.
She'll be back.
Yeah, she'll be back. I'll keep it in my mind. But it was just something that came up for Nick. I was just going to ask. It was on the comments. It said, "Is it okay if I ask it now?"
Yeah.
And it says, yeah. In addition to the butterfly. I'm sorry, the purple butterfly. Has your team increased adding support mechanisms for families in the NICU, such as peer-to-peer support, memorial events for the hospital, etc.?
Yeah, we do. We have a wonderful team of nurses who work together with psychologists who provide support for parents there on the unit, but also kind of peer support out of the hospital setting. They've run groups, bereavement support groups, where parents have brought some of their other children along to those groups as well. So I'd like to see a lot more of that, but I think it's just made everybody almost feel easier talking about it. I think in the past there was this kind of like idea that you should just lock grief and trauma away and sort of try just to kind of put a lid on it. And I think really what all of us have learned is just acknowledging that when you go through the trauma that you have been through, that sadness is never going to go. I mean, it doesn't matter how many support sessions, psychologists, you're always going to feel sad about what your babies. How could you not feel sad? And I think sort of encouraging people that it is okay to feel sad. It doesn't mean that your life isn't working out, but to acknowledge that. And one of the things that I really learned from my psychologist was just using the word acknowledgement. And when I think of all the challenges that we have and the challenges that we identified in the Butterfly Project, a lot of it comes down to acknowledgement. And that was physicians not acknowledging how traumatic this had been for parents, not acknowledging that this was a twin pregnancy, not acknowledging that there was a baby who died, not acknowledging that this baby has a brother, or it comes down to acknowledgement. And where you as bereaved parents feel acknowledged, you feel more validated by professionals, how much easier that makes the relationships that we have. So when I talk on this to my trainees and other professionals, it's like, if you take one thing away from the session, just take away acknowledgement. Just think, are you acknowledging what this person's going? You might think they don't need to be sad or worried or whatever, but they are. So you need to acknowledge it. So that for me was a very important learning point.
I again remember, when we did lose Zoe, it was that acknowledgement that it meant so much to me, and I felt like I needed to kind of hold on to this identity as a triplet mom, even though you couldn't see all three babies. And so, strangers on the street would see me, with a double stroller, and they'd say, "Oh, twins." And I'd say, "No, actually, they have a sister in heaven. They're triplets." And that was so important to me in those early years. And it didn't, I didn't really start to change that until my survivors got a little bit older and they were in elementary school, and they came home one day and they said, "Mom, can we just be twins?" And I said, "Well, why? You're triplets." And they said, "Well, everybody tells us that we're lying because they don't see Zoe. And so we just want to be twins." And that's when I realized, okay, this is their story. It's mine to be told in a different way, and they need to be able to do what's comfortable for them.
Absolutely.
and that was a big kind of
Yep.
awakening for me in how they were experiencing the loss of their sibling growing up, and it was kind of allowed me to say, you know what, it's okay if not everybody in the world knows that I was a triplet mom.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it, and that's and
Yeah.
you know, that's what's important. But early on, absolutely, it's like she has to be remembered forever, and everybody needs to know who she was and that she existed, and you know, and I'm going to tell you whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really, I mean, that I totally get that. I understand that. I think that, and that's sort of a good segue in where I was thinking about you, Corey, before.
Sorry.
Was this, no worries.
I got kicked off. I don't know what happened.
No, it's okay. It's okay. So tech gremlins, they exist.
Uh-huh.
But it was
Yep.
just the idea, and it kind of, you know, what Nick was saying earlier as well is that we kind of live in this grief, and what you're saying too, Carrie, like you live in this grief that manifests itself in different ways over the years, and it changes and twists and turns, etc. And so I just think about, you know, when I think you said early in the bio about the I'm paraphrasing and forgive me if I'm saying it wrong, but how do you like
life?
And yeah. So how do you grieve?
Mm-hmm.
And you know that grief, like you said, Nick, is going to stay with you at some point. And I love what you said about you're oftentimes the only ones that, you know, as health club professionals, knowing that child existed,
Yeah.
you know, and that was
Right.
It's like, wow, that is so true. But so just talk us through a little bit about, you know, that sort of living in that space of grief, but you're also still living. So we don't, you know, they combine, they are combined. And sort of just talk us through sort of your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, you know, we call that like the and life. Yeah. It's what that you can grieve and you can be joyful simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest part. And what was interesting was, in Judaism. So one of the things that, you know, we say, or not that necessarily that we say, but one of the biggest parts about grieving in Judaism is that it's all about the griever. It's about the person who is mourning. But it's also acknowledging that, and we do it, it's kind of set in steps. Like there's 7 days, you sit Shiva for 7 days to make sure. But then there's a kind of an end cap at that because life moves on. And, you know, you do what you need to do for those 7 days, but then you kind of remember you're not the only one who's mourning. You're not the only one who's been through something that's hard. And it's just kind of that way to move on from it, and not necessarily move on, but to acknowledge that you can still be sad and you can still have all of those feelings, but also to remember that you are still living and you are still celebrating and you can still be joyful. And I think that's where we have to be in the NICU, especially with multiples, that, you know, you can still celebrate that one twin that's still surviving and also mourn and acknowledge the twin that died. And, you know, remember that this is a whole different baby and this baby needs you to be there also. And, and it kind of goes back to what Kira was saying about, you know, her girls and that they wanted to just be twins. And I tell parents all the time, parents ask me with Grams, you know, well, how do I respond to this? You know, people ask me, you know, people say, oh, you know, do you have any others? Or, and it's just, it's circumstantial, and it's however you feel and whatever is right for you. And if that means you need to still mourn and you need to still have that, what's the word I'm looking for, that reassurance that you are a twin mom or you are a triplet mom, then you tell them the story. But if you want to just kind of take that break and go along with your life and move on, then that's okay too. And you just say,
I really love that, Corey. I mean, it's just, because I think for me, it was like, if I'm celebrating, then I'm invalidating Zoe, or I'm, you know, I'm not showing that I'm still grieving. And it's almost like this, you know, you really were able to embody that it, one doesn't invalidate the other. They, you know, they exist together.
And there's always going to be a place
style.
Some,
right.
Yeah. You know, we have the way of light. That's always a day to remind people that those other things existed. But that gives us our day to grieve each year. That's aside from a death day, but it's also a reminder for other people. So.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the acknowledgement that you were saying earlier, Nick, about, it's important and that it comes out in different ways. I kind of feel like we need to sort of change the narrative, even as a society, that, just
Well,
how we talk about this in a different
exactly.
way. Sorry.
And
Yeah.
I know from speaking to people who lost their brothers and sisters like 80 years ago, that I mean, this lives with you forever. But, unfortunately, many years ago, people were encouraged not to talk about brothers or sisters or babies who had died, and how difficult that's been, and how much that's resulted in quite complex psychological trauma, because people were told, pretend this baby never existed. And I'm lucky that we've now carried on the Butterfly Project. We're working with lots of families, and we're making more films. And we've just been out over the last couple of weeks filming families and speaking to the children who are twin or triplet survivors of a baby who died, or older brothers and sisters, and asking them, how do they think about and remember their brother or sister? Because it's of course not just you as mothers, but I mean, you're the ones that everybody sees on this type of initiative. It's the dads and it's the other children in the family. I mean, how do the other children in the family come to terms with the fact that they had a baby brother or sister who died? I mean, how do you make sense of that in your head? So that's really interesting. We need better understanding of that. And then just coming back to Corey's point about her faith and how important faith is for a lot of people going through these kind of challenging times, how most often faith helps. But I've come across mothers where the way they've been encouraged to grieve by their community elders runs counter to what they naturally feel, and how difficult sometimes traditional cultural expectations stop you as mothers, fathers, grieving the way that you feel you want to grieve.
Yeah,
I think that's a big thing in Judaism too, is just that acknowledgement that grief looks different for everybody.
Yeah.
And we're grieving, there's traditions and there's things that people know and do, but the majority of it is comforting the person who's grieving, and keeping the dignity of the person who died, but also comforting the person who's still here in whatever way they need.
Well, we are just about at time. I think we could probably go on talking another hour. It's been so wonderful to have all of you. I'm wondering, just as we begin to close, Corey, do you have anything that you just would like to say to other parents who may be grieving the loss of their baby?
I think just a reminder that it's okay to talk and acknowledge them. And, we always say the baby's name, acknowledge them to yourself and acknowledge them with other people, but as much as you're comfortable with. And it goes back to that, you do what you need to do each day. Some days you can share and some days you can't, you don't need to. And it doesn't mean that they didn't exist. It just means that it wasn't the right space to have those for yourself. But that there's just.
And what about to those healthcare professionals that are caring for these babies? What would you want them to know?
I think the same thing, just that acknowledgement and that reassurance that other baby was still there and still cared for. And a reminder that you are right now, that mother is feeling like they're not able to do what that baby needs. And kind of what Nick was saying about, having that complex of, we are the only ones that are caring for them. And it's a big responsibility, but it's one that you guys do so well. And just remembering that mother is just hoping and praying that the doctors and the nurses are able to do everything that they can, but also for them too.
Yeah, it's kind of like owning your story. Yeah, like you're able to own your own story. Yeah,
absolutely.
Sorry.
Nick, any final thoughts or comments?
I often say to people, it's the little things that count, and I want to reassure doctors and nurses that none of you parents expect us to be miracle workers or religious leaders, psychologists, but you appreciate it when we show that we genuinely care. And those little interactions, what psychologists call
Mhm.
micro interactions, that that offer just to stay back after round, make someone a cup of tea, just to sit with somebody, just to acknowledge that the baby existed and what he was called. Those little things are what make the difference. And people don't need to go off and spend days learning communication skills or learning to be psychologists. That you just need to be a normal human being and recognize these little interactions we have with you every minute of every hour on the neonatal unit. That's what make you trust us. And if you trust us, then the difficult decision making is that bit easier. And if you don't trust us, then that's really challenging. So, where we show that we genuinely care, that's when our job gets a bit easier, I think.
Yes.
And
We definitely need a part two.
yes,
There are so many
absolutely.
things. I'm just like, I'm trying to shut my brain down because there's so many things I want to sort of, ask Corey and Nick more of. So definitely a part two.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you all, Corey, Nick, Gigi, obviously, for being with us, and to everybody who took the time to listen, either live or will do so in the future. We really hope to make these access to these efforts as simple as possible. So please just make sure to check our Facebook and our Instagram and our LinkedIn pages, and you'll be able to see what we have coming up next month for Prematurity Awareness Month. So thanks, everybody. And yeah, go ahead.
Just really 2 seconds, just to acknowledge and thank everyone that was on the chat, because there were some people that shared their story as well. So I just wanted to thank you for those of you on the chat that actually shared your experience. We really appreciate that.
Yes, thank you so much. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.
Ciao, ciao.